Many know Egypt as a country home to the Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, pharaohs, and mummies, but few know about its diverse and complex petroleum industry. The petroleum industry of Egypt is a large component of the world's petroleum industry. It has a long history that has made it a multifaceted entity in the world today. Egypt's location allows it to import and export high levels of both oil and natural gas. This presentation explores the ins and outs of Egypt's petroleum industry. It began in 1883 in Ras Jensah in eastern Egypt, but struggled somewhat until the involvement of large foreign companies. Today, Egypt is the second largest oil and natural gas producer in Africa that is not in OPEC. Egypt is also important to the industry due to its location near the Suez Canal. This allows it to control most of the imports and exports of the surrounding areas. The industry in Egypt has suffered a great setback due to the revolution in 2011, but its future remains bright.
Oil and natural gas in Egypt. There is no doubting the importance of Egypt's oil to the world. Being the largest non-OPEC oil producer in Africa, Egypt plays a significant role in the energy market. On a global scale, Egypt exported an estimated 100,000 barrels per day in 2012, namely to India, who received 46% of the exports, the United States with 32%, and Italy with 17%. The United States imported roughly 31,000 barrels per day of crude oil from Egypt in 2012. This is a dramatic increase from the past 5 years, which averaged to be less than 6,000 barrels per day. In the mid-1990s, Egypt's oil production peaked at over 900,000 barrels per day. Ever since its peak, the oil production has been in constant decline as the fields matured. Conversely, the production of natural gas liquids has risen, which balances the decline. In 2012, Egypt's total oil production was estimated to be about 720,000 barrels per day. 550,000 barrels per day compensated for crude oil, while about 170,000 barrels per day was NGO. In contrast, total oil consumption in Egypt was about 755,000 barrels per day in 2012. In the last decade, oil consumption has grown by an average of 3%. Egypt's production has been outpaced by its consumption since 2010. These increases in local consumption can be accounted by two main factors: economic growth during the 1990s and the government subsidies on oil products that lower prices of oil. Because the fuel prices in Egypt have not significantly changed in the past years, oil consumption has been encouraged. With new oil discoveries in the past few years, mainly due to a US-based exploration in Egypt's western desert, oil reserves have been expanded since 2008. However, these new finds have simply just offset declining oil production in older fields. The use of enhanced oil recovery techniques, which are ways for increasing the amount of crude oil extracted from an oil field, have also aided in the declination of oil production. Despite this, oil production is still steadily decreasing while oil consumption is continuing to rise. As you can see from the graph, oil production has been decreasing up until 2008 when new oil reserves were found. Even then, the oil production still continues to decline while the oil consumption increases steadily. As of now, most of Egypt's natural gas is consumed in their power plants. Due to the rising shortage of oil for consumption, natural gas is expected to be increasingly important to the future of Egypt's energy resource. The Egyptian government is promoting industries, businesses, and households to switch to natural gas instead of using petroleum and coal. Since January 1st of 2013, Egypt's natural gas reserves have totaled to be about 77 trillion cubic feet, the third highest in Africa. This is an increase from 58.5 TCF in 2010. This sudden increase is due to new discoveries in areas such as the Mediterranean Sea and the Nile Delta, with a few in the Western Desert. Much of the natural gas production is used to satisfy Egypt's domestic demand for energy, while the rest is exported. Egypt produced about 2.2 TCF of dry natural gas in 2011. 1.8 TCF was consumed domestically, while 0.4 TCF was exported. The graph shows Egypt's natural gas production constantly rising up until 2009. This was due to a drop in output from offshore gas fields, which also decreased Egypt's export amount. Because of this drop in output and their need to satisfy domestic demands, the Egyptian government may begin to import natural gas.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about the Suez Canal and Sumed Pipeline. The Suez Canal connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea and Gulf of Suez. This canal has a depth of 66 feet, and over 60% of all tankers are able to safely travel through the canal. The only tankers that are unable to travel through the Suez Canal are fully laden, very large crude carriers and ultra large crude carriers. That is where the Sumed Pipeline comes into play. Fully laden crude carriers can lessen their load by a process called lightering, which is when the tanker drops off some of its cargo at the Sumed pipeline so it can gain access to the smaller, more restricted Suez Canal. The tanker can then safely travel through the Suez Canal, and then it can pick up its cargo that it had originally dropped off at the other end of the pipeline. This allows for much more oil to be able to travel through the Suez Canal. If the Suez Canal and Sumed pipeline were to close for some reason, then tankers would have to travel around the Cape of Good Hope, which is the southernmost tip of Africa. This would add an extra 2,700 miles to the route, which would greatly increase the cost and shipping time of crude oil to North America. This shows just how important the Suez Canal and Sumed pipeline are.
Contrary to popular belief, Egypt has numerous other means for obtaining energy for its people, other than just the use of oil and natural gas. Although these fossil fuels do account for the majority of Egypt's energy, averaging around 90%, Egypt must find new means of obtaining energy due to the rapidly increasing domestic demand. Egypt uses three other means of obtaining electricity, including hydroelectric power, solar and wind power, and nuclear power. Hydroelectric power is by far the most valuable source of Egypt's present-day energy. It's Egypt's third largest energy source behind oil and natural gas, and claims just under 10% of the total electricity produced by the country. With the exception of the dams in the Nile, other hydroelectric sources in Egypt are basically non-existent. Because production of hydroelectric power seems to be stagnant in Egypt for the moment, solar and wind power will have to aid Egypt's high domestic demand sooner rather than later. Solar thermal power plants as well as wind farms are beginning to spring up all throughout Egypt. However, experts say wind farms are a much more reliable and efficient power source. Because of this, the Egyptian government plans to make wind energy as much as 12% of Egypt's total energy within the next few years. Wind power accounts for less than 1% of Egypt's total power today, so this jump to 12% would provide a major rise in Egypt's total energy supply. Finally, Egypt is looking toward nuclear power as an alternate source of energy. Perfecting means for obtaining nuclear energy is a long, tedious process, but will in the end play a major role in meeting Egypt's growing domestic demand for energy.